All right, so I want to add the ability to add individual awards to people. Right now, although we can pick a random user and maybe give somebody an award like that, be nice to be able to store different awards on different people's profile. Now, what I'm going to do is show you how you can use classes that are defined by values in your controllers. So that's actually going to be a pretty useful technique for you to have when you are creating your own projects. So to do that, the first thing I need is to add another button. That button is going to activate a form right underneath each one of these fields. So I'm right down here at the end of check-ins list, and right underneath the delete button, I'm going to add another button, and it's going to have a class of BTN and then BTN love, and also we'll have our tooltip class. And we're also going to need an ng click so that when somebody clicks on this button, they're going to execute a method called show love in the current scope, and we'll pass along the information about the current check-in. So remember, this check-in right here refers to as we go through the loop of all the check-ins in the Firebase database, we are asking for the data for each individual check-in. So we're passing the entire sort of information about the element that we're clicking on to our method here. And then I'm going to need a span here for the tooltip. It's going to say show the love. And if we save this, we should see the button appear right here next to each one of these items. And it's not going to do anything yet until we write this method. So what this is going to show is a section that is going to be a form, and I want to put it right after this info div right here. So it's still going to be within the check-in div, but it's going to be an additional piece of info right after this info div. So let's go ahead and add it right there. And this is going to first be a div with a class of show check-ins. And so what I'll do here is show this element if there is a variable check-in.show with a value. So this is going to show if checking show exists and it has a value. And what's going to go in here is a form. It's not going to have an action because it's an Angular form. It's going to have a class of clearfix just to make sure that all of the floating works properly. And when somebody submits this form, is going to execute another method called give love. It's also going to pass along the current check-ins info, and it's going to, as a second parameter, pass along a check-in gift text. And this is going to be essentially an input field that we're going to type what we want to give to the user in. So let's go ahead, and we want to also add, we've got to make sure we close this method here. And let's go ahead and make this a little wider so we can see what we're doing better. And finally, we want to make sure that we validate this with AngularJS. So we include the no validate parameter right here. And then we can type in our input field. So this will be an input type text. The name is going to be gift text, which is what we pass to this give love method. And then it's going to have a placeholder, and it's going to say, what are you giving them? And it's also going to have an ng model directive that is going to point to the check-in gift text. So this is going to create the variable that we are then going to pass along to the give love method. This give love method will contact Firebase and store that information underneath each one of these users. We'll make this a required field, so we'll use an ng required directive and set that to true. All right, so we'll need a button to submit this. So this will be a button. The type will be submit, and the class will be BTN, just a regular button. And this will just be a plus sign. And this button will be disabled unless the form is valid. So just like we've done before, ng disabled if the form has an invalid parameter in it. And let's go ahead and add a comment here. Always a good idea when you have a ton of these divs to make sure everything has a comment. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's see, show check. Looks like I'm missing a C there. Check in. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And we shouldn't see anything quite yet because we don't have any buttons that activate the expansion of the forms. So let's go ahead and write the show love method. And you could do that really anywhere in here. It's got to be in the scope of the current form. So we'll say scope, and then we'll do show love. And this is actually going to do a couple of things. So we'll create a function here. It's going to receive my check-in. It's going to receive the information, in other words, from the form. And what we're interested in is which check-in we are interested in doing something with, because each one of these is going to be an individual check-in. So what I'm going to do here is activate two different values or two different variables. We are going to set something called, or actually toggle something called my check-in show. And if it does have a value, we're going to set it to the opposite. So essentially, this is going to be sort of a true-false value. And if it is true, or if it's showing, right, then we want to unshow it. And we'll set it to a negative value here. So my check-in show, right? So my check-in show is equal to the opposite of whatever it used to be. And then we're actually going to create a variable that has a value, so we'll need to toggle it. We're doing sort of the same thing that we're doing with show, but in this case, we're going to create a variable that either has a value or doesn't have a value, and then we can use that as a class to turn a feature on and off to make it display or not. So we'll say if my check-in user state is expanded, then we're going to set it my check-in user state is empty. Otherwise, we're going to set that to have a value. My check-in user state is going to have a value of expanded, right? So this is essentially just a regular toggle. So what it will do is create a variable called user state that's going to have a value. And let's go ahead and save that. Let's go back into the check-ins list because there's one more thing we need to add. And that's going to be right now in the list item. So what we'll do is whenever that variable check-in user state has a value, we are going to ask that that gets added as a class into this list item. And that's a special directive called ng class, right? And we'll say check-in.user state, right? And so whenever this user state class has a value of expanded, then that class of expanded will be added to each one of these elements. When that class exists, it means that we are going to see the form just like this. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. So each one of these list items has the opportunity to expand the form where we can type in what we're giving each one of these users. So that actually works pretty well. So there's two things happening here. First is this class called expanded that shows or hides each one of the forms that we added to these elements, right? And the other one is my check-in show. This refers to this check-in show that's going to actually show the form element. So this form element is not really going to exist unless two things are happening. The check-in is defined or declared as an element that's going to show, and the list item has a class, relates to that check-in user state. So with both of those things, we can create this really complex form that appears when we need to. And although we haven't added the ability to add gifts yet, we have everything we need to complete this form and give the users the functionality of adding individual prizes to every one of the users.